this video, I'm going to be building an awesome RTX 3070 gaming PC build for 2021. I'm going to run you through all the parts I selected for this build and why, give you guys some alternative recommendations, put the system together from start right through to finish before finally booting it up to see exactly how it performs in the biggest titles out there. So without any further ado, let's dive into it. After a quick ad from today's video sponsor. The Corsair K70 RGB 10 keyless Champion Series keyboard is one of Corsair's latest releases and builds a keyboard in an awesome 10 keyless form factor. The Champion range has been specifically developed with top esports pros and builds on years of testing. RGB can be easily customized in Corsair iQ as usual, while durable PBT double shot keycaps and Cherry MX switches guaranteed for 100 million keystrokes keep you on top of your game. Learn more at the link in the description below. As always with a GeekaWhat video, we're going to kick things off by installing as many components as possible into the motherboard first off. This will really help to get the ball rolling with today's build and make things as easy as possible. In terms of the motherboard we've selected, NZXT's new N7 B550 board is a fantastic choice. With support for the latest super fast Gen 4 SSDs, room for up to a Ryzen 9 5950X, 4 RAM DIMM slots and a great design, it makes for an awesome board today. You can actually get this board in a white colorway as well, which would look awesome if you're also able to source a white GPU. Overall though, the board is a great looking board and it's going to work well for today's system. Into the motherboard we're going to install the CPU, and that's the first major component in any build. I've opted for a Ryzen 7 5800X as it's one of the greatest CPUs on the market right now. Unfortunately, Intel's 11th gen launch was a little bit of a flop, and while they've got some decent options in the i5 range, if value's what you're after, the Ryzen 7 5800X is a superior choice in basically every single way. I'm going to be coupling it with 32GB of RAM from Corsair. This is their Dominator Platinum RGB. It is on the higher end of the market, and something like the Vengeance Pro SL is a better, cheaper option, but the white aesthetic should look really nice for today's two-tone build design, and the super bright Capellix RGBs make for some fantastic build aesthetic. This RAM is also 3600 MHz, which is a speed that Ryzen really likes. Don't underestimate the power of fast memory when it comes to a Ryzen processor. Plus, having 4 DIMMs gives us some nice dual channel performance gains, which can really make a difference to your in-game frames per second. The final component to install into the motherboard, now the RAM's in, is actually the M.2 SSD. Now, picking storage for a build in 2021 can be quite a tricky choice. You definitely want to go for a fast M.2 drive though, for at least your Windows boot up drive. This 1TB XPG Gamix S70 by ADATA is going to do a great job of not only booting us into Windows, but also storing our favourite titles. This drive from XPG though is an absolutely awesome choice, and it comes with an optional heatsink design that you don't have to install, but if you'd like to, it's definitely there to look after you. This is quite a nerve-wracking moment. Never actually done this to an M.2 SSD before. Here we go, let's try and line it up. Well, that was actually surprisingly simple, and that's going to really easily install into the top M.2 SSD slot on our NZXT motherboard. Make sure you remove this cover and then remove the fastener M.2 screw, which will allow you to slide the drive in at a 45-degree angle and secure it very easily back into place with the same screw we removed just a moment ago. Awesome stuff! With the motherboard assembly, as we call it, nicely complete, it's finally time to move it into the case choice for today's build. This is Lian Li's legendary O11D. This mini version isn't actually all that mini, but it is a bit smaller than the absolutely huge full-size option. You still have room though for full-size ATX motherboards, nice and long graphics cards, and plenty of water cooling support, meaning this chassis really does tick all the boxes. Let's get it out of the box, see what it looks like, and move the motherboard over. As far as case design goes, I really can see why so many people love this chassis. With a large tempered glass side panel on the side, a really nice aesthetic up front, and overall just a fantastic finish. The build quality really is second to none, with a nice USB-C port on the front panel, a decent I/O, and as we say earlier, plenty of water cooling support in what is actually a really unique case layout and form factor. Let's kick things off by taking off the side panels, and we do this by just removing the top cover, which allows them to be unlatched before we move the motherboard nice and easily into place. I always find that once you've installed the motherboard into a system, the whole thing just seems to come together. And that brings us nicely on to the next component today, the CPU cooler. Now, we want to get a good cooler to make sure not only the processor stays nice and cool, but it will keep your system nice and quiet as well. If you stick with the stock cooler in a build like this, not only will it look a little bit silly, but it will also make the system quite noisy. And that's where the Corsair H150i EliteCapellix comes in. This cooler features Corsair's Capellix RGB technology that we'll also find in the RAM today. Plus, with these really nice included ARGB fans, it should look fantastic and fits in with the two-tone white and black colour scheme really nicely. In an ideal world, I might have mounted the radiator at the top of the case, and while it sort of appears to fit, you can't actually get it straight because of the height of the built-in rear I/O shield. That means it's not really going to work. Instead, I think mounting the radiator at the bottom of the case is going to be the better option. I know some people will not be very happy about the fact that the radiator is a lot lower than the pump, but it shouldn't really matter. And this cooler is very well built. It is designed to run like this to a degree. And in a pretty specialist case form factor, sometimes you just don't have the choice. A 280mm rad here would look good as we did in a recent Lian Li 011D build, but I wanted to go the 360 today and really push the boat out. We can actually as well rotate the top plate on the cooler, so the Corsair flag logo is the right way around, which is going to make a lot of people out there quite happy, I think. Step 1 then is to actually secure the radiator in, as we mentioned, which is then followed by step 2, which is the installation of the fans. You can either stick with the included fans that you get with the radiator, or go for these fancy Corsair QL fans, which I'm going to use for the whole build today to make sure it all is really nice and colour coordinated. We're then going to go ahead and fasten the water block into place. You can see in our case it's ready to go with these AMD style brackets that simply unscrew and then fasten down to the pre-installed plastic mounting hardware that comes as standard with Ryzen motherboards. So really nice and easy, super simple, and then we'll just go ahead and rotate the Corsair logo and the cooler's done. That was actually not too difficult. Before we proceed onto both the graphics card and the power supply, I'm just going to take this opportunity to add in a couple of extra fans. So 3 120mm at the top and a couple of 120mm on the back here will not only make sure the case looks amazing, but also give us plenty of airflow and keep the temperatures, which we'll look at later, nice and low. Looking pretty good if I do say so myself, which brings us nicely on to the penultimate component today, the last part to install before we finally go ahead and look at the graphics card. It is of course the power supply. This is Cooler Master's V850 SFX. Yes, this is a small form factor power supply, and there's a good reason for that. With this case being the mini version, you actually haven't got room for a full-size ATX power supply, which is what helps to keep the case quite compact. This 850 unit from Cooler Master though is going to be an awesome choice. Plenty of wattage, plenty of headroom, and a 10-year warranty. 10 years! So this thing's going to be great. Plus, it's fully modular, so you only plug in the cables you need, making everything nice and easy. Lovely stuff. So that brings us nicely onto the graphics card choice for today's system. This is, of course, the RTX 3070. Now, in spite of new releases or new rumours floating about, this is still a fantastic choice. It slots in quite nicely above the 3060 Ti with much more legs at 4K than its cheaper sibling. This card is the Asus TUF gaming version, which at RRP pricing is phenomenal value, especially over something like the Strix or the Gaming X Trio. But given current market conditions, any 3070 you can get hold of is what I'd personally go for. The Strix card though has 3 large fans to keep the GPU nice and cool, while the overall 3070 design has 8GB of video memory, more than enough for even the most demanding titles out there. We'll dive into some performance testing later in some of the biggest games out there, so hold tight for that. But let's see just how good it looks installed into the system. We are going to have to navigate the radiator tubes, so it could be a bit fiddly, but we will get there in the end, and the GPU is going to look pretty phenomenal. To my surprise, actually, this is almost meant to be. The case has got a little bit of extra padding or bulge on the back, and that makes for plenty of room for the tubes to just slot behind the GPU. That means they haven't got to come under, they're not kinking, and it flows really quite nicely. Let's secure the graphics card down, finish the cable management on our system, and then boot it up to see how good it performs. But first, how fantastic it looks when it's all powered up in an epic glam montage. In typical GeekaWhat style, roll that montage. Awesome stuff! Now we've seen how good this system looks when it's all powered up, let's take a dive into the land of performance, see how this absolutely epic system stacks up in the latest and most popular gaming titles. On your screen now, first of all, is a summary, a snapshot view of all the different games we tested out, alongside the temperature performance figures for both the CPU and the GPU, showing that this build, despite all of its glass, still manages to stay nice and chilly. If you'd like to see the full unedited runs of all the different titles we tested today, we'll put a playlist of that in the cards section now, over on our benchmarking channel. But let's take a closer look at some of our focus titles, kicking things off with GTA 5. Here at 1080p high settings, we got 176 FPS on average, with 164 and 143 for the 90 and the 99th percentile results. And this was tested with both NVIDIA FrameView and with MSI Afterburner's Reaver Tuner, so we can be really sure of the numbers we're getting. Apex Legends is next up, and at 1080p high settings, we got an impressive 206 FPS. 1440p results were good too, in the region of 143 FPS, but I hear you guys, you want to see these games at 1080p, especially for the high FPS first-person shooter titles. We also tested Valorant at 1080 and 1440p. At 1080p first of all, we got 417 FPS on average, not a bad showing, while at 1440p the number dropped slightly, but still not too bad, at 338 frames a second. Call of Duty's Warzone is next up, of course the new map update, and a game that seems to be more popular than Cold War, which is a bit ironic. Here we got 135 FPS at 1080p high settings, leveraging the power of DLSS 2.0, with solid 90 and 99th percentile results in the region of 116 and 105 FPS respectively. That brings us on nicely then to the penultimate game we tested today before we look at a bit of Fortnite, and that is of course Cyberpunk 2077. Here at 1080p medium settings with DLSS set to performance mode, we got 106 FPS on average. These kind of frame rates in Cyberpunk are unrivaled, with the 3070 and Ryzen 7 in particular really pulling their weight in Cyberpunk 2077. But James, what about Fortnite? Well, we did of course test it at 1080p competitive settings. We've got you guys covered, and that of course involves 1080p low settings across the board, with the render distance set to far and DLSS enabled to give you that extra resolution scalar frame rate. And here there are some fantastic results to report. 205 FPS on average is not a bad showing, with 186 and 157 bringing in the rear with some strong 90 and 99th percentile numbers. But with that, that pretty much wraps it up for the whole video today, not just the benchmark section. If you enjoyed it, make sure to get subscribed. Thank you very much for watching though, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.